Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine, and I'm the Education and Industry Programmer here at the 24th Toronto Real Asian International Film Festival. Welcome to the Canadian Spotlight Artist Talk featuring Howie Tsui. As the Canadian Spotlight is internationally accessible this year, we encourage audiences everywhere listening in to learn the specific histories and stories of the land they are settled on. Here on Turtle Island, we recognize the numerous treaty lands, agreements, and the unceded territories. Real Asians offices are specifically located on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a treaty of collective responsibility for the protection and sharing of land and resources, emblemized by the one spoon. We acknowledge and reckon with as a festival that elevates voices from Asian and Asian diasporic film and media arts, our responsibility as settler immigrants to this land and its original stewards, having benefited from a long history and ongoing present of broken treaties by the Canadian government. We support and uplift the ongoing work of Indigenous leaders and communities fighting for reparations and justice. We honor the work and follow the lead of Indigenous organizers, creatives, and communities that are working towards better futures, who continue to give us hope, language, and possibility. Thank you again for being present at our festival this year. For tonight's Canadian Spotlight, we would like to thank Crave and Bell Media and the Canada Council for the Arts Digital Strategy Fund and Ontario Creates for their support of the Canadian Spotlight series and this talk. Just a reminder that if you're watching live from Cinecent and you want to ask Howie any questions, to send it through the type a question box to the right of your stream. If you're watching this on the phone, the chat will be at the bottom of the screen. You're also more than welcome to hop on the Real Asian Film Forum on Discord to join in festival-wide conversations throughout this time. We have a code of conduct policy that we ask you observe. You can see all the links that are being dropped into the chat as we speak. And so welcome again to the Canadian Spotlight. Every year, Real Asian chooses to spotlight a Canadian filmmaker, but this year we chose to spotlight 3 artists working at the intersections of experiential, experimental, moving image, and narrative. With the festival's move to a digital platform, we took the opportunity to introduce innovative, non-traditional, experiential programming that was made with digital presentation and engagement in mind. We're really excited to host Howie and his frenetic, playful GIF wall on our website. You can see his work on the website at realasian.com/festival until November 19th. We will also be joined later by Grayson Lee, who will be chatting with Howie about his work and his influences and how everything sort of came together. So now I will hand over the time to Howie.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Jasmine, and thanks, Real Asian, for inviting me to be part of your program and giving me an opportunity to play around, I guess, with this, making a project for the online kind of medium. So I guess today I'll try to quickly give a quick backgrounder on my practice. And it's a very truncated version, but it would be a good introduction. And then for the remainder of the talk, Grayson and I will chat more specifically about the project I created, the GIF Roulette for Real Asian. And for people that are interested in my practice, given that this is kind of like a truncated version, there are online a lot of artist talks if you search my name and the Vancouver Art Gallery or the Power Plant. So those will be longer, more thorough kind of artist talks that I've given that are available online. So let's begin it off. I made a little slideshow, and there it is. And you know, my artist talks sometimes are a little painstakingly biographical because I do sort of honestly excavate the volume, the torrent of visual culture that impregnated my brain during this certain period when the brain is very malleable and absorptive to images. And it seems like my practice in recent time tends to be always about excavating these hooky seeds, these images that have kind of informed my ideas about a certain visual language that gets communicated in my work, as well as a sensibility, as well as just an era. It's like this kind of mid 80s kind of era that I'm kind of digging up. So let me start kind of skipping through. So I guess I wanted to speak about quickly on a bio level that I guess I was quite lucky as a kid to have traveled it to a lot of places when I was very young. I was born in Hong Kong in like the late 70s. And I guess during that time, I also traveled a lot with the family, and we had also were living in Lagos, Nigeria. So we're kind of living between those two cities. And I think what that provided me was a early kind of absorption of kind of very kind of diverse and kaleidoscopic kind of perception of the world. And I think this sort of kind of, I don't know, polycultural absorption ends up appearing in my work, or at least this desire of defining a certain diverse ecology. This is an image from my class in Lagos, Nigeria, my kindergarten class. And I think at that time when I was living in Lagos, I was also getting all these kind of media inputs. My uncles would send me video cassettes of this particular anime that I liked, Dr. Slump, who's created by Akira Toriyama, and he's more well known for his series Dragon Ball Z. But this is a kind of precursor series he did, and it's very absurd and surreal, outlandish and comical and kind of and perverse. And I think those kind of adjectives permeate my practice. And this is something I saw when I was like 6 or 5 or something like that. In 1984, I moved to Thunder Bay, Ontario from Hong Kong. And it was quite a contrast move from a metropolitan city like Hong Kong or Lagos to Thunder Bay, which is a town of 110,000 people in northwestern Ontario. And it's a blue collar pulp and paper mill town. And from here on, this is when I immigrated to Canada, assimilated, and I basically lived in Thunder Bay until I went to university. So elementary and high school. One important kind of biographical point that kind of leads into my practice is that in order to immigrate to Canada, my dad and some friends opened up a video cassette manufacturing company. So there's an image there of me on the car, and then there's the factory behind it, Vika. And this symbol and the medium of the video cassette is quite symbolic in my practice. And a lot of the seeds of a lot of the images in my work are imprinted on video cassettes. And my dad's company, they would make video cassettes, blank tapes, and they would sell them to schools and other people. But he would also send blank tapes to my relatives in Hong Kong, and then they would copy TV shows and movies and then send them back to us. So there was a kind of a trans-Pacific exchange of media. And then another way I grew up was my mom had opened up a Canadian Chinese restaurant. And I wanted to show the menu here today because it also aesthetically kind of mirrors some of my tendencies in terms of my art making. See, it's very maximal. It looks really dense. The font is small. It's convoluted. And when I look at this, it kind of reminds me of why my work is also so busy and jammed up. But also, I think at this period, I was also learning about how, as an immigrant to Canada, that there's this tradition of kind of self-exoticization in terms of having this Chinese restaurant, and also this idea of a fictional, imaginary China. where there's dishes being fabricated that don't really exist, and they suit a certain palette. So these kind of concepts of like self-exoticization and also like almost like a fictional fabrication of a culture also rears its head in my practice, like my current practice. During the time in Thunder Bay, I'd still receive these really nice consoles from my uncle, who tried to keep me tethered to the cool things that were going on in Hong Kong. So here's like old Famicom pre-NES console that I had. So these are all kind of like images and objects that end up kind of informing my work. But in Canada, I also was exposed to and kind of got attracted to other parts of like Western pop culture that, so the Muppets, this whole idea of like a whole diverse kind of bunch of characters, just like from the Dr. Slump image I showed before or my school photo. I think this desire to create a multitude of characters is also kind of permeates my practice. And then Kiss, probably some sort of darker, maybe I was attracted to some sort of darkness or like kind of glam darkness. Yeah, I also really enjoyed He-Man as a kid because there was so many characters and also there's so many hybridized figures. And I remembered having, I used to have my first sketchbook. I just drew different He-Man figures. And then I ran out of He-Man figures to draw, so I started creating my own characters. In high school in Thunder Bay, there was, a group of us that were really interested in independent indie rock, independent labels. And that was kind of like a little secret society thing. But in a way, it also kind of follows through this thread about very specific regionalizations or things not being homogenous. It's like this label's from Athens, Georgia. Their music is like this. And this label's from Chicago and their music is like this. And I think maybe I'm old now, but these days I'm very, a little sad about how homogenous culture has become. So these are kind of like me just being nostalgic and wishing things were a little bit more defined, like kind of distinctly defined. When I went to art school at University of Waterloo in the 97, I think I was struggling a little bit about a lot of Canadian contemporary art, which I actually didn't really know anything about because I was, doing weird things in Thunder Bay. But what I learned from a lot of what was exposed to me was not artwork that spoke to me or was functioning on a different kind of vocabulary or language than the way I communicated, as well as what kind of inspired me and drove me to study art. So it was difficult at the time because a lot of work was seemed very kind of niche or suited for a certain kind of privileged demographic. And, so luckily I was in some video store in Waterloo at kind of like an art house and outsider video store. And they had these magazines there. So there's Juxtapose, which is kind of like a lowbrow pop surrealist magazine that came out of California. Giant Robot, which started as a zine in LA and then kind of grew up into a magazine. And then Tokion. Giant Robot was very important because I didn't even know there were people in North America reporting or covering stories of, films that I watched, which, I would never discuss with anyone else because I didn't know anyone would ever see these films. So there'd be like a Chow Yun-Fat feature. There would be like a Wong Kar-wai feature or something like that. So seeing these magazines gave me some hope that there was other kind of subcultures where that my visual language would belong in. So I kind of kept on pursuing my art practice. At the time, I was also very interested in this kind of Bay Area mission school street art, kind of crossover with fine art. This is Barry McGee. And one ally I had in art school at University of Waterloo was a professor by the name of Art Green, and you can see an image of his work on the left. On the right is an artist named Carl Wursum, and they are part of a movement called the Harry Who and the Chicago Imagists, which was a art movement based in Chicago that functioned in parallel with, I don't know, the abstract expressionists and pop artists of New York at that same era, late 60s, 70s. However, their interests were much different than what was going on in New York. They were not very kind of tethered to the market, the commercial market, and most of their work was quite personal, opposed to about culture around them. And so it was kind of gutsy, and it was kind of like, open up your heart. These are my dark thoughts. And they were also very much inspired by underground comics from kind of counterculture movement in the 60s. So it was good to have this kind of other historical anchor for my practice, because I had, a lot of drawings in my sketchbooks that profs may deem, oh, this isn't serious art. It's like a comic. It's like anime. So it provided me with some support. This is like some early post art school artwork that I made. I moved to Ottawa in 2002. And at this point, I was making these kind of cute, I called this series Kawaii Noir, but it was mostly using both cute characters and this kind of candy-coated palette in order to kind of inquire about kind of the baser aspects of human nature. By that, I mean, are asking questions of if we are innately wired to do dark and horrible things. I think this came about when as a kid, we would take these army worms that were writhing and kind of like pulsing on trees, and we would knock them into bottles of rubbing alcohol and then just pour them on the pavement and light them on fire and cook them up. And I was thinking about, why did we do that? Like, where did we get such a horrible idea? And I was wondering if this kind of wiring is persistent even as people become, let's say, political figures or people that are leading countries, Also at the time, I was thinking about a lot of these transformer robots that I have, and the faceting and this concept of transformation and kind of conglomeration. And so I was looking also at these surrealist images. On the left, there's Archimboldo, Utagawa in the middle. And then at home, we also had these African butterfly artworks, which are made images created out of butterfly leaves. So it's my kind of interest in compounded images. And I was interested in this idea of compounded images as a way to be an allegory for the inherent nature of shifting identities that's kind of part of diasporic immigrant experience. So this is in 2006 when I was playing around with Haku-size manga collages, and I would ink on top of them to create these hybrid portraits. Afterwards, I started messing around with these shunga, Japanese spring erotica reproductions, and moving to a more grotesque and monstrous kind of period. So I moved away from this cute kind of period into more kind of like a abject. And I think at that time I was thinking about how maybe I was being perceived, or maybe Asian culture might be perceived. Like if, I like to nibble on a goopy tendon, or, like I remembered when I was in high school, I'd ask my mom, it's like, oh, my classmates asked me if you cook cat at the restaurant. And then my mom would be like, you silly child, do you know how much effort it would require to catch a cat and skin it and prepare it, and how little meat you'll actually get out of it? It's like, I'd buy a turkey. But it's like these kind of elements of like perhaps this consciousness of being perceived as disgusting or abject or dirty. And then so I started moving into the monsters probably to deal with that. Following that, in 2009, I had a series called Horror Fables, where I was satirizing fear in a way. And I ended up creating these scrolls, and they were kind of compounds of different snippets of ghost stories that I read or horror movies, as well as familial stories of hauntings that my family had told to me. What I was interested was exploring fear in kind of two different facets, right? Let's say in Adam Curtis's documentary, The Power of Nightmares, he was discussing how fear is instrumentalized as a form of control that states and governments may use to control a populace. But for myself, I was also wanting to contrast that with this more kind of warm and loving instrumentalizing of fear, like the way my mom would come up with all these freaky, scary things as a form of control to protect me. Or so she'd say, like, eat every grain of rice in your bowl, or your future wife will have like warts all over her face, or something like that. Or there's a Cantonese term called san an tiu tsum, which translates to grow eyes impaled by needle. But it's supposed to, it was her way of telling me that if I watched anything with nudity in it, that I would feel the piercing pain of a needle kind of impaling my eyeball. So these are these kind of weird, otherworldly and fantastical ideas that were implanted in my brain probably when I was a kid. And I think this series, Horror Fables, I am trying to kind of reinvestigate that and then analyze fear and how it may be applied in multiple ways. In 2011, I also created a project here in Vancouver at Center A. And this would be my first example of playing around with the idea of moving image. And this was a project involving these wooden boxes, magic lantern projectors. And it's a tradition from Japanese phantasmagoria tradition called utsushie. And basically, it's more of like a social practice project where I came to Vancouver, I did a residency, I interviewed elders from Vancouver's Chinatown. And what I was trying to do was gather stories around superstition, trauma, hauntings, ghost stories, and trying to amalgamate them into this performance. The images, the characters I used once I took people's stories was based on this book, The Classics of Mountain and Seas, which is an ancient Chinese text featuring all these species of different types of people in almost a fantastical land. You know, they'd have like backwards feet, you know, split tongues, and all sorts of kind of fantastical anthropomorphic qualities. My interest in using these characters was because in Chinese Canadian history, when I did a lot of research, Chinese Canadians and, you know, the people that helped with the railroad and they were always kind of defined as a nondescript mass, you know, like a homogenous group, whereas they're, you know, so my strategy was to create, you know, depict them in a very distinct way. Like this has this features and so forth. So it was a way to kind of combat this kind of nondescript way of framing early Chinese Canadians in Canada. In 2010, I went back to Hong Kong for the first time in 25 years since I moved to Canada, and it was had a major impact on me. I saw this animated scroll called The River of Wisdom, which is a kind of multimedia exposition artwork that was produced by the Chinese government, and it was an animated version of a Song Dynasty scroll along the river during the Qingming festival. And at first I was very impressed. There's like 18 projectors, and I was already thinking about creating moving images out of my 2D works anyways. Here's an image of the actual original scroll. But what I realized, you know, once I started processing it, was that it really depicted this very idealistic society and very socially harmonious city. And this was being kind of projected and exhibited in Hong Kong at a time when a lot of the local populace was feeling quite uneasy about how society was going to change with the handover of Hong Kong from colonial Britain to mainland China. So in a way, I wanted to maybe kind of disrupt this representation. And that's when I kind of thought about populating an animated scroll with a genre that is very near and dear to my heart, Mouha, which is martial arts fantasy fiction. You know, the most popular Western breakthrough was like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I guess. But when I was a kid growing up, I watched this particular series, the Condor trilogy by Gam Yong, Jin Yong. And this is a series I watched in the 80s. And it was strange because I was watching these on video cassettes in a basement in Thunder Bay, which is a very cold place. But it kind of, the basement and the video cassettes kind of created like a portal back into Hong Kong. So the media was very important, and the symbol of the video cassette makes it so. At the time, I was also traveling back to Hong Kong more frequently and finding it very inspiring, and also that it kind of answered a lot of questions about kind of artistic visual tendencies. So here's like some touristy video I shot while I was there. But what kind of I came to a realization of was, oh my God, 20-minute time check. Let me try bang through this. What I came to a realization of is that a lot of my interest in dynamism and busyness and all these directions and density and mirrors and kind of micro worlds, windows upon windows. These were all part of the urban landscape that I experienced as a kid in Hong Kong, and it was very, I guess, very impactful. And it was almost like this is the way my brain likes to process things, or it likes to process a lot of things, or it likes to process things at a certain speed. Anyways, but yeah, I'll try to. I'm running longer, which I suspected I would be, but I just wanted to show you some more of this. But I'm getting close there to getting Grayson in so we can talk about GIF Roulette. But anyways, let's see if I can power through. These are early schematics to this project, Retainers of Anarchy, which maybe near the end we could maybe play a video for, but I probably will avoid it. But it was a scroll, and I wanted to also input this Kowloon walled city into this environment. And the interesting about Kowloon walled city for me was that it was almost a kind of organic community that kind of developed on the boundaries of British colonial Hong Kong and mainland China. And it was an ungoverned society. So police would not enforce laws there, and they tapped into local electrical grids. For me, this place was a very symbolic avatar for both how the martial arts world was depicted as a kind of self-organized, the rules are kind of organically formed environment, as well as just this kind of in-between place, this liminal zone for kind of echoed I experienced my identity here in Canada. And this is kind of part of some of the research I was doing. Stephen Teo, who writes really good essays about the genre. Here's some animations. The work was an animated scroll, so I collaborated with a lot of animators at the Emily Carr University here to produce a whole bunch of animations that kind of fit into this media work. Here's an image of me and my collaborator, Remy Tsui, who's also a very kind of gifted composer and media artist. And we're working with a software that composes all these visual assets, all these animations that we produced, and we jammed them into this picture space. But within the software, it can control where the camera moves and And then it also runs on an algorithm. So it kind of randomizes the path or journey that viewers experience that work. So I'll play a really quick, maybe 1 minute here, and then Grayson can come on, okay? Retainers. Okay, so without further ado, I'll introduce Grayson Lee, who's art cultural scholar and art. Yeah,
something like that. I mean, yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm so glad to be a part of this. Just listening to you speak right now, Howie, like the one part where you're talking about serious art and comics, I feel like we could have had an entire conversation on just that topic alone. So I'll have to give you a call later for that.
Yeah. Are you getting flack?
Well, I mean, like it's like I've been there for a little bit. I'm okay right now, though. I mean, okay. Yeah, you know what? It's like it is what it is. But yeah, so I'm here. I'll be responding to Howie's GIF Roulette, or GIF Roulette, as some equally correct people may refer to it. Indeed, some might say that the pronunciation of GIF may be even more correct than GIF. But I'm not a linguist. I'm just a PhD student with a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology. I'm working on pop culture. And lucky for me, Howie, your GIF Roulette is full of pop culture. So I've just got like this thing I'm going to read out. It was like my reaction to your piece. It was fantastic. I really loved it. So here we go. Okay. The experience of opening Howie Tsui's GIF Roulette, I'll be using the pronunciation with the hard G from here on to honor Howie's own pronunciation, is not instantaneous. A few GIFs load here and there in the middle of the browser, popping up sporadically, and then the banner at the top appears, a green roulette table displaying the title. Very soon thereafter, we are faced with a cascade of looping pop culture memorabilia, sure to delight, mesmerize, and seduce a certain population of the millennial generation. I feel like half of like Real Asian staff just got like named right there. Like Aram, Kelly. GIFs from classic kung fu films, classic anime, and 80s, 90s era Hollywood fill the browser in a waterfall of Asian and Asian American kitsch, forming a palette of garish crayon colors and glowing neons. Instant memory triggers for so much of the Real Asian community, I'm sure. And thus, I wish to hone in on the idea of memory as a key starting point for reading Howie's digital install, and specifically, a point on memory I return to often. Memory, whether discussing the computer or the brain, is not separate from hardware or the body. We often conceptualize memory as being some sort of abstraction from the physical world that exists in an amorphous cloud of software or consciousness, but the truth is memory is very much embedded within our world's physicality. The data within your hard drive is not some sort of electrical signal floating around in the air and separate from the physical makeup of your machine. Data is actually comprised of micro-etchings within the disk. The memories of your brain, similarly, are not just floating thoughts. They are housed in a separate dimension, but rather they are formed in the wiring of your neuronal synapses. Now, while memory for both the brain and the computer are physical constructions, memory of the human is not something that is stored in quite the same way as the machine. Our memory does not work like storing a book on a shelf. Instead of folders and files, thinking of the neural networks that make up our brains, memory for us is more akin to weaving a bunch of ripped pages together in a net of cobwebs to form meaningful narratives. The other thing about our memory then, unlike the book on a shelf, is that it is exceedingly vulnerable and open to change and augmentation every time it is revisited or remembered. We're constantly navigating ourselves in new stories, and so even when the memory remains completely intact upon recall, our return to the memory puts us in a different position from the first moment of experience as we switch from inscriber to reader or storyteller. A classic example of the way this works is the big fish story, a favorite of men who go fishing and then consistently increase the size of that one fish they caught when they tell you about it later. Very typical of male storytelling to get excited about things growing in length. It's also typical of men to remember things as being much bigger than as they exist in reality. And so the reason this is important is that while memories are literally embodied within us, constructing our physicality and existing as material constructs, they are also not markers of objective happenings, but instead are the narratives of meaning that construct who we are and how we relay meaning to others. But of course, Howie Tsui's GIF Roulette is not a collection of memories as they exist in the brain, but instead is a collection of artifacts of memory. As artifacts, they are enmeshed within a different conversation from the one described so far. The GIF has become a powerful and favored tool of communication as of late, with the rise of platforms such as Giphy. With this rising and arguably now falling ubiquity and relevance, the GIF has faced scrutiny and critique for its function and implementation as a performance of digital blackface, with white and other non-Black folk utilizing GIFs featuring Black bodies to perform the role of communicating on their behalf. I'm sure for many, this is unsurprising given the history of whiteness consistently struggling to escape its bland, unseasoned, pale existence and turning to the mining of other cultures and beings for flavor, life, and in the case of the GIF, turning to Black bodies for the expression of any emotion besides indignant guilt and snobby side-eye. By the way, if anyone listening wants to use indignant guilt, you are welcome to, but please credit me because I coined the term. Also, in case you don't know what indignant guilt is, it's that thing that certain folks do when you mention that racism possibly still exists, and they do this performance of like, I'm sorry, no, I could never be racist, and they start crying. It's a very specific form. So anyways, now returning to Howie's GIF Roulette though, what I hope to demonstrate in my previous discussion is that the GIF is intimately tied to politics, specifically politics of representation, of bodies, and of ownership. Then further, Howie's art installation is not just a single GIF, but instead is a massive collage, an art form that has been consistently and intimately tied to political upheaval, moments of war and post-war, the absurd, and the intervention of narratives through stealing, reclaiming, cutting, and then interjecting, rearranging, and pasting. GIF Roulette's wide array of artifacts function to collect and claim before then presenting an eclectic arrangement that seems to speak to so many different possibilities, all threaded together by the spirit of the artist who watched, selected, and compiled them. When I look at GIF Roulette, I'm looking at one or possibly many stories of you, Howie, but furthermore, I see myself and many others bound by the consumption of a particular era and genre of representation in Asia, such as the importance and relevance of the popular and popular culture as it stretches across and forms the bodies of entire generations. But I do not intend to relinquish GIF Roulette to the realm of nostalgia and reminiscence. For again, to conjure up memories is to retell and re-engage them, to reassess the size of that fish when it was first caught, and reconsider how we want to tell that story among and simultaneously to many others. Conversation is occurring across this curtain of arranged GIFs as all these brackets, myths, representations, caricatures, farces, spoofs, absurdities, and fantasies wiggle, loop, and shout meanings tied to their past, our current moment, in addition to our dreams of mapping the future. When I look at Howie's GIF Roulette, I see so many of my own memories reflected back at me, nudging reminiscent feelings, remembering watching VHS tapes in between working the cash at my family's Mr. Convenience and Video 99. But I also see these as collective nodes working in a system much larger, connecting bodies and times in powerful contexts under multiple overlapping and discursive meanings. These were some of the thoughts that arose as I stared at Howie's animated collage of Asia and not Asia. Okay, so I got like a few questions now for Howie from me, and then I guess when do we turn to questions from the audience? I think the last last 10, 15 minutes, Howie?
Well, we have like 20 minutes left.
Okay, so let's go with like 10 minutes of this and then 10 minutes of question Q&A from the audience.
Sure, and then let's see what's out there. If nothing, then you can hit me with another question.
Sure, sounds good. Let's do with that. So my first question is, what do you see when you look at these GIFs in GIF Roulette?
To me, it was kind of like the recesses of my brain, because most of them are from older films that I saw from that super image absorptive period in my life. So it's like the nooks and crannies that I'm getting back into.
Right. Yeah. So maybe not like the front of your brain, but like somewhere in the corner in the back, right?
Yeah, I think this all started because I think I was using Giphy to communicate with friends, and then I may have saw an image from some old movie, and then I was kind of digging around to see what was out there and what holes might need to be filled in terms of sourcing and representation.
Oh, cool. So speaking then on like this idea of representation, there's an eclectic mix of like Hollywood representations within GIF Roulette, but there's also like, you know, some of the representations are like the EU Orientals kind of evocation that's like typical of like the 80s and 90s era Hollywood. And then there's also like a lot of the kitsch stuff that like kung fu comedy representations that are like directly from Asia, right? You've got like God of Cookery or whatever, what have you from in there as well. Can you like talk about like how like this juxtaposition is happening? Is it a juxtaposition? Do you think they're talking to each other? Like just tell me more about this.
Yeah, it was intentional that I wanted to mix how I think it was during this very kind of important period in my life, in like 84, 85, like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom I saw in a theater in Hong Kong. And I think that was the first time I saw an Asian body represented in a Western film. And then, you know, I moved to Thunder Bay, and then I was seeing Goonies, and Data was there. And so in a way I wanted to kind of compare how Asian bodies were portrayed at that period versus other bits of media and movies that I watched at the same time that were produced in Hong Kong, and how they contrasted, you know, from like goofy sidekick versus like a cool assassin. But like when I look back at it though, I was like, I think I moved to Canada, like Thunder Bay, where there's like barely any Asian people. Like I moved there at the right time, because I think just even having the sidekick stereotype character helped like neighborhood kids become like more curious about me, or were more friendly or accepting, because there was this like you know, harmless and good and funny like sidekick character. And I think, you know, it was like it was like maybe a good period, even though those depictions are very problematic now. I look back at it, but at the time, I think it probably was helpful, because it made me a little less alien and less strange and more approachable, you know?
Okay. So we are getting a few audience questions in here, and I see a few of them actually match up with some of my questions as well. So I want to draw towards a different question. My question was actually like, what drew you towards digital animation and the GIF format? And then similarly, I'm going to tag on some of the audience questions. One being like how did you make these GIFs? Did you find them already made? And then also, what are your thoughts on how a digital presentation / installation affects the audience's experience of the art? So maybe just like mix all those together, and if you need a reminder of the question somewhere in
here. Yeah, I'll try to knock them down one by one. Mm-hmm. Your question was regarding, what was it?
What draws you towards the digital format and the GIF?
Okay, so the GIF, for me, I realized that essentially, you know, once my media work went up, was in real life in a physical space, I realized that they just functioned as GIFs, because essentially they're a constellation of looping animations, because we had certain parameters of how long animations could be, and also parameters that we wanted them to loop seamlessly. So I think I started looking at the work itself was just GIFs kind of scattered in a landscape painting. So I think that's how I moved to this project. And then the question around how these GIFs are made, I was using, I think, Easy GIF, which is like an online tool. And initially I was just going to like probably do some stuff with Giphy, but I knew there is a very limited bank of images, and I started thinking it's way better for me to just cook my own. So then I started digging up all my films, and then it would lead to another film that I didn't have, and I tried to get that. So they became kind of like a wormhole, because I would get on one track and then I'd be like, oh, I need to knock this gopher in the head, and then I got to knock that gopher in the head. And that's why Jasmine's probably like, stop sending me GIFs.
No.
What up on this website? But I feel like there's like a quality thing, that I'm not representing one genre or one director or something. So what else do we got? Thoughts on
your thoughts on how the digital presentation or the digital install of this affects the experience of the art. I mean, that kind of ties in with what you're saying too. I mean, if you want my response, I feel like what you were just saying about constantly sending Jasmine more GIFs, it feels like with GIF Roulette, there was no such thing as too much, at least in the experience, like.
Yeah, it's almost like if there's more, then there's more kind of webby connections that can be made. And I think originally when I conceived of this idea, this project, I wanted them, every time the page reloaded, it would produce a different order, another jumbled arrangement, so that different GIFs in certain vicinities to one another would talk to each other and have a different dialogue. So sometimes the dialogue would be regarding, oh, we share similar themes, and then other times could be like, well, we formally share similarities, or there could be, it was kind of like finding new relationships by association, and also this idea of free association and kind of the subconscious mind working on creating connections.
In that, so I'm gonna tag onto what you were just saying there a little bit with one of the first audience questions, actually, which is what period, age-wise, do you see your brain as being the most absorptive?
That's good, because I think I think most of my work is all in this 5 to 9, maybe 5 to 9. To me, seems like a sweet absorptive zone. So yeah, and then the other question about activism.
Oh yeah,
as it is less likely to be picked up by censorship. Yeah. I think when I worked on when I started the project, I first had to do a lot of Googling about GIFs and censorship and intellectual property. And then, from the research, it seems like it's not litigated that much. So I guess that's why we went ahead with it. But but it's also, I think it's the idea that these short snippets are decontextualized from the actual, the full-length film. And then it's now getting kind of placed in a different context and then becomes new. So I think that's kind of the kind of safety around that. But as a form of activism, activism against censorship? You think that's a question?
I mean, I think it's kind of a bit confusing. Like, if anything, GIFs are really popular right now for lots of reasons. They're kind of like the digital activism of the GIF. I'm not really sure with that question what it's actually asking. I would probably have to I'd ask whoever asked that question if they could follow up. Unfortunately, meanwhile, based on what you were just saying, though, I'm actually kind of curious to hear from you what kind of conversations you think are happening across these GIFs, as they're spliced. You're talking about lots of associations and things. How do you see these things kind of interacting with each other if they are sort of separate from the main films that they're taken from?
Well, I think at first I was looking at scenes that were actually burned in my head, that I was searching for and wanted to bring them back out. So a lot of things were particular, punchlines in comedies or certain hooky, sensational kind of scenes. But then I think as I got, deeper and deeper in the process, then I probably looked at them more formally. I think these frames would make a nice loop. So then I slowly started getting more obsessed with this idea of a closed loop and a perfect circle, and also yeah, and then just the symbol of a circle started to appear more. So I was looking at things formally after a while. So less about what the content was, but more picture.
Oh, Howie, are you still there? I think you might have cut out for a second. I'll just wait a little bit till Howie's back. I guess while I wait for Howie, maybe Howie will have to rejoin. Well, wait, there's only 10 minutes left to the end of the session. We got another few minutes here. I guess I can talk by myself about GIFs and collage. To be honest, I also work a lot with collage, and so I've got way more things I could talk about what Howie's GIF roulette means to me. For one, oh, Howie's back. Is he back? Okay, Howie's not back. I'll just keep going. So with collage, I do want to go back to sort of the digital activism thing that was happening before. I'm not sure if that question got clarified by the audience, but if one thing I would say is digital collage is in its moment right now, and collage has historically been tied to moments of political upheaval, as specifically this thing that is taking things that are actually already set in certain narratives, and then you kind of work with it and fit it into a different kind of narrative, usually in direct juxtaposition against whatever political narrative is trying to be positioned originally. So right now we see a big heyday of digital collage, and I think the GIF is a huge part of that. I actually like the way Howie has made a collage of GIFs here specifically for that reason. Normally the GIF is already a cut from something larger, right? And then it becomes abstracted from its original narrative. But here I like that they're connected to many things, creating a larger kind of conversation across larger networks. As Howie was saying just recently, just before he cut off there. How are you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
Welcome back.
Yeah, I have no idea. Wi-Fi.
That's okay. Yeah, it happens to all of us. I guess that's the digital age. I think you were talking about the conversation that are happening across. You're talking about there was each, at first you're looking for single punchlines, and then you got really interested in it formally in terms of things like a perfect loop. And then from there, that's the last thing I heard from you.
Yeah, and then aside from that, then I was started to think about different genres. I was thinking about different genres and mediums. Then I was like, oh no, my whole animation category is super thin right now because I hadn't gotten to it because I went down some other wormhole. But I think another important thing about theme in this work, as well as my other media work, is this idea of repetition and the loop, right? And I was doing I was answering a different question from another project about repetition, and I came across this quote from Elizabeth Margulis, who's a kind of music kind of cognition scholar. And she has this dope quote. It's repetition changes nothing in the object repeated, but it does change something in the mind that contemplates it. And I've been thinking about repetition a lot, and how it also is a form of meditation, or kind of aids in a form of meditation. I had another art project that involved percussion and a knocking pattern, repetitive knocking patterns. Is a sound art project. I wouldn't fit.
No. Okay, Howie's gone. I had one last question for Howie. I actually have his answer too, because he answered this pre-leaving, And I had noticed that there was a lot of Shaw Brothers films represented in GIF Roulette, but I didn't notice any Golden Harvest. So I asked him Shaw Brothers versus Golden Harvest, and his response was, I must admit the theatricality and formal production qualities, films, sets, costumes, effects of Shaw is superior, but I was born in 1978, which means I'm a Harvest kid through and through. I also, I guess I really agree with that. They're both just like different moods. I can't actually choose one between either of them. I thought for sure Howie would have an answer, but I also am a fan of both Shaw and Golden Harvest. Different strokes for the same folk, depending on what mood in which they woke.
Super tenuous, my connection. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I think we actually have 1 minute left. Howie, you're talking about the loop. I guess you can just wrap that up, and then we can turn it back to Jasmine, actually.
Yeah, I think, in my media work and I guess this GIF Roulette, I think looking into the idea of the loop and trying to get people into a trancey meditative state, so I think it kind of follows through with that.
I will say that I definitely got in some sort of meditative state while staring at GIF Roulette for like hours while trying to like write up what I was going to say in response to you. It was a lot of fun. So I want to say thanks for having me in this conversation. Thanks to everybody that listened. I guess we can turn it back to Jasmine, unless Howie, you got any last words?
No, I just want to thank you for responding to the roulette. Thanks, Chris, for interpreting. Thanks, Jasmine, for helping me get it up. And big ups to Real Asian.
Big ups to Real Asian.
Yeah.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you again to Howie for that artist talk, and thanks to Grayson for that conversation. It was a lot of fun, a little performative at some points. Special thank you also to Christopher from Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Services, Atif for backend support, digital producers Mimi and Joe, and for our awesome audience leaving hilarious comments every time Howie disappears.
Yeah.
Just a reminder that Real Asian has programming lineup going till November 19th. You can check out all our amazing films, Q&As, other panels, and also the Canadian Spotlight digital installations. They will be available on the Watch portal till November 19th, the replay of this artist talk, that is. You can find all of this information at realasian.com/festival. So hope to see you all at other events throughout the week. Have a good night and stay safe, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Peace out.